Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage, a video series and podcast where me, Mike Hutchinson, a designer of miniature games, and this guy, Glenn Ford, also a designer of miniature games, get together on the regular and we discuss the topic of designing better miniature games because we've been trying really hard. We will get better, I promise you. Now, one of the things that we try routinely to do, and we've talked a little bit about why we maybe do it, but we try and write campaign systems. And gosh darn it, we sometimes even play campaign systems. But Glenn, you were saying that you'd caught wind of some discussion recently about how it is that you go about writing a campaign system that actually has an end to it, and what some of the problems that arise when you maybe don't crisply define where the end of a campaign should be, or maybe you just get it wrong, and campaigns can peter out, or worse still, they can snowball out of control so that no one's really having any fun anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the conversations I was having, actually, one of the comments, one of our videos was mentioning that playing through a campaign system, getting to a point where everybody had all the upgrades and all the powers and all the things they could possibly want. And they've been playing for a little while. And basically the sort of the person running the campaign said, you know what, guys, I'm not having fun. And everyone else was like, yeah, no, we're not having fun. We haven't had fun in ages. It stopped being fun when we all had because there's the stage where you have all the things you actually need, and then there's a stage where you have all the things you want, and then there's a stage where you just have all of the things, and the game still says, yeah, keep playing, and what happens when your campaign sort of hits the tops out on that power curve. And funnily enough, there in my opinion, there tend to be campaigns that don't have an end point, and they just say just keep playing so long as it's fun, and then maybe stop if it comes to a point where it isn't fun.
And are you thinking really about progression systems rather than sort of campaigns, as in sort of narrative or map type things?
Yes, if you're getting sort of crunchy on the definitions of campaign stuff.
It's what God put us here on YouTube to do, Glenn.
Campaign style, yes, progression systems, things that link together a series of games within which there are changes made to your forces, that are open ended and sort of organic.
Because I think that like many things, what's his name, Blood Bowl and Necromunda, he provides the right answer here, which is and it gets repeated again in Gloomhaven, it's enforced retirement. Once you calculate roughly how many XPs or gold pieces or whatever is enough to get almost everything that you want, but not quite all the sweeties in the sweet shop. And then you say, haha, as soon as you get to that point, sorry, sucker, enforced retirement. You're too old, or you get swept up to the big leagues, or, you do whatever, whatever point it is, because that gives you the possibility of a long-running campaign at a club where people drop in and they drop out, but it's okay because people naturally evolve. If they stick around for long enough, they have to start a new gang. If they drop in, there may be gangs at different points or whatever. So I think enforced retirement is obviously it's not necessarily an ending a campaign, but it's certainly an end point to a progression system, and one that can be quite regenerative.
I mean, there are bits of that might be a word. I mean, it's funny because I think this is a very RPG kind of a question. If you've ever GM'd or whatever, a long running sort of RPG with the same group of people, and you go through different campaigns and different storylines, and they get to the point where they are of godlike proportions and awesome powers. And you realize that nobody's been having fun for quite a while because there's no role playing to be done. I walk in and I'm basically a thunder god, and everybody dies, and then I just pick up the loot and I walk out again. And you have to find these ways of going, okay, it's time to put these guys out to pasture, and signaling when your players should be considering doing that. Because it's hard if the game just says play until you're bored. I mean, I know board games that have in their rules, play until you're bored. And it's that's the worst possible conceivable rule, to even imply. What it is play this until you hate it. And
right. Yeah, play this until the merest suspicion of like the excitement might be coming to an end, and then immediately snip it so that you're like, oh, let's play it again because I almost got what I wanted, but I want to play it again.
And that's the thing. And to get people to basically what you want is for players to quit while they're ahead. It's that thing of like when you have one great night out in a particular place and then you keep going back there year after year to try and recreate that night out, and it just gets worse and worse. You need to just walk away while things are still good. But players won't do that because it's like, well, that game I just played was brilliant. The game after was like 90% as brilliant. 80% is brilliant. Nobody walks away at like only 70% brilliant, or even at an acceptable level of brilliant. They walk away naturally when they get to like 3 weeks after 0% good.
Right. And I know we talked about like the way that progression systems can lock up the sweet shop and force you down one path or another. But I think that's also really important, is like if there's a finite set of resources or an end to the campaign or a certain number of gold pieces you can pick up before you have to retire, like it needs to be a number that enforces a meaningful choice, where I went route A and then B and then E, which meant I couldn't go D and then B and then D, because those things, and that gives me an excuse to go back and replay it and find out how to do it in a different way. I guess I'm thinking a bit of like the way that video games tend towards limiting the development of a skill tree, so that by the end of the game you're very powerful, but you almost certainly haven't got everything. Then you are inspired, if the game's good enough, to go back and say, well, I liked that, but now let me try a mage build, or let me try using the flamethrower this time, or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of these things where what you're trying to build a bittersweet moment for your players. You're trying to not give them everything that they want, and it's one of these things where it's like if you ask them that what they wanted you to do, it's kind of like, well, what we want you to do is to give us all of the toys and let us play with all of the toys. And it's a bit of a sort of, I know you think you want that, but I think that what you want is for me to take the toys off you at just the right point. So you're like, oh, the toys. And I go, well, you can rebuild the toys. I will rebuild the toys. I will rebuild them. Oh, it was lovely. Oh, you know what? I did that toy. I got 99% of the fun out of it. Maybe this time I'm going to stick a different like arm on him, etc., etc. And it's a really it's one of those ones that's a really difficult needle to thread. It's like, I want to take the toy off you at just the right amount of time. If I take it off you too early, then I'm just ruining your fun, and you're going to get frustrated. And
it's a pacing issue as well, because like right at the beginning of the campaign, I feel like I want lots of things, so that I'm like, whoa, really cool. Because I've played lots of campaign games where you get a little dribble at the beginning and like, oh, come on, it's going to be like 3 more games before I get anything that's meaningfully exciting me narratively or from a gameplay perspective. But at the same time, that's tricky, because if you gave them a bunch of sweets at the beginning, then as you begin to eke that out every 3 or 4 games later on, you're like, oh, come on, the blood's gone out of this. So I don't know. It's definitely a pacing issue, and with these sorts of games where you don't control, there's a vast array of variables that you don't control about what makes the experience fun. It's really tricky to, unlike a video game, to be able to sort of guesstimate what the fun sort of rhythm is going to be in those early games, such that you're guaranteeing the thing. But I do feel like the one place you can't go wrong is ending it early. Like it's almost impossible to go wrong with ending it early, because if you got some fun out of it, then either people can go, no, we ended it too early, let's do 3 more games, and that's up to them, or they can just be like, oh right, well, that was fun, let's play it again, or let's play it next year.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I think you want to make sure that at least the person has enough bits to go, oh, ka-chink, ka-chink, that was fun, before you end it. But I do think that it's possible to end it too early, where the person has like, it's particularly if you've got like a progression system that's a little bit random, or particularly says, okay, you're not allowed all these things, or one where all of the level 1 things are like really cheap. And so someone goes, oh, well, I'll buy all the level 1 things and get the taster menu going, and we'll see which of these things I like. Or I've gotten these things thrown randomly at me, and I've not been given 2 pieces of the same jigsaw puzzle. And if it ends then when they're still in that stage and they're like, oh, whereas the other guy was like, oh no, you were meant to take one path, and they would have all fitted together. And look what I can do. I can run up a wall by bursting somebody's head with my mental powers, and then flip over the lava river that I created with my, farts or something. And you're still going, well, I can both get out a penknife and a frying pan. So
But I mean, I guess that those are both pointing at the same problem, which is you want a power curve that everyone roughly follows, and one of the main things with endless campaigns or very long campaigns is that you just get extreme divergence in the people who did well and the people who did poorly, or the people who figured out what they were supposed to get, or the people who spent their money, like you say, like spent it broadly and didn't get a lot of synergies and couldn't work it out. And again, I think that like hitting the reset button fairly regularly avoids that like stagnation with a big distance between players.
Yeah, I suppose the one thing about sort of hitting whatever is a reset button or an endpoint button is, it's one thing when you say, okay, each warband hits their own retirement point, or each guy within a warband hits a retirement point. So you've got this constant staggered thing of, and that can be really handy, although it can be tricky to keep track of. And
no, but they're like inside a warband or inside like units leaving and coming back. That's quite cool as well. Like you get quite a lot of narrative out of that.
Yeah, you can get a lot of narrative out of it, and it depends on like how crunchy you want to go with your sort of campaign system. The thing I think to be aware of, if there are sort of defined stopping points, is if there's a defined stopping point, there's a bit where you can no longer catch up defined point prior to the stopping point. And that's one of those places you've got to be really like super aware of, because that's where you're going to get player drop off. Know what, if you say, oh, it ends in 10 games, and no one can catch up with the leader by game 7. It ends on game 7. It doesn't end on game 10. And so finding ways to sort of, I'm not a fan of the idea of let everyone have a chance to win until like the last second, because like, well, all that's doing is making sure that the first X many turns I may as well just have been in the toilet, having a sandwich or something. Toilet sandwich.
That's what I'm doing.
Where was I going with that? I just, for some reason, I think that would be doing in the toilet. Wasn't why.
Yeah, I can't think of a single thing, man.
I don't know why I went with toilet. And so I just
the crap of my sandwich.
My brain tapped out for sandwiches or for some reason. But the point being, it's like, you need to find a way to disguise or make things fun, or make that sort of it's too late to catch up point sort of come really hard and fast.
I mean, I'm going to say something controversial, which is I just think that progression systems in war games is just one of the worst mediums of gaming to enjoy a progression system. Like I would much rather enjoy a progression system in a role-playing game, but you know what? I'd much rather enjoy a progression system in a card game, but much more than even a role-playing game or a card game. I much more enjoy a progression system in a video game. Like progression systems in miniature war games, for me, they just seem to be completely surplus to the point, which is having an awesome experience with a friend across the table. And yeah, sure, we can have like a fun time by like rolling on some tables or having like continued battles. But for me, a strong game that repeats its core loop in an interesting and different way every time we play, just for me always wins out over like we had a game and it advanced over the thing. And like, I don't know, I'm definitely super biased in this case, but like as a game designer, when I'm thinking about progression systems in war games, I am very suspicious of them, because I have experienced a ton of incredibly enjoyable and engrossing progression systems in video games, and evoking that same depth of flavor and depth of tactical replayability and variability of paths that you can take. Like it's an excruciating job to do that in a miniature war game, not only because the time investment is so big, but also because the variability of the experience is so unpredictable, because it so depends on your terrain or your opponent or the do you know what I mean? Am I out on a limb here, Glenn?
I know what you mean, and I do know where you are coming from. The weird thing is that I've never, in any of those other formats you've ever played, made up have the same level of in-jokes about the armies that are playing on a given table.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the thing that progression systems and things are always reaching for are the way that a certain person comes along with a certain army, and you've seen them play other people, or you've played them week in and week out forever long. They get out a certain unit, and everyone goes, "Ah, it's little Jimmy," because that guy is always the last man standing in every single army. He never dies, and even though he's like the cheapest like dude on the tabletop, for some reason he took down a bloodthirster last week with his pitchfork or something, and the unit champion always gets picked out before him. But little Jimmy with his pitchfork banner, or he takes down giants. What you're trying to do is you're trying to go, little Jimmy isn't just in your imagination anymore. I have entrenched him within rules. And now you can go to people and go, this isn't just an in-joke that we're having. This is a thing that we can build together, and it have reality, and it have, weight and justification and those sorts of things. I think that's, I think the campaign systems, like you've rightly said, are separate from progression systems. For me, progression systems, what I want them to be able to do is to entrench those things that you made up, but that you had to throw away again because your army's just
right. So some happenstance through a spotlight on a model or a unit, and you want a way to capture that in a bottle and say, yep, because the spotlight was thrown on that person, we shall forever remember that he's got +1 ballistic skill because he shot that ogre through the eye, and wasn't that great, and we'll sing about it in the pub afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I remember ages ago, one of the campaigns I ran at a local GW store was one where you built a regiment. Remember regiments of renown from the mercenary armies in Warhammer. You built a regiment of renown for a particular army you were playing, and then everyone agreed that from then on, anybody who played in the store was allowed to use that regiment of renown. So you built them, they had some special abilities, and then if somebody else wanted, they could come in with next week with your regiment of renown. And so it's okay, we'll all agree these are going to be,
these exist in the world,
this group, like permanent rules, and open it up and say, yeah, it has a reality, it has a tangibility. And it was a weird idea, but I think it helped to give it some sort of weight to those things. And I think that's what progression systems are reaching for in these sorts of war games. That's what they want to be able to do. And I agree, a lot of them miss the shot, and a lot of them sort of go awry. But ideally, it's that sort of, you remember how that guy did that insane thing last week? Well, now he's actually got a rule that says he does that insane thing. So it's real now. It's proper. It's not just us like making stuff up.
See that is intriguing, because back to your original question of like, when should you end a campaign? How do you end a campaign? How does it go on? When does it go on too long? And that's an interesting way to allow the system to pull out the most delicious and fun parts and sort of throw away the rest of that army or that gang or whatever, and just be like, well, do you know what? Mad Donna has emerged from this Necromunda gang, and now Mad Donna is a thing that exists in this world, and we all think she was hilarious. And we'll throw away the rest of that gang. Like, you can start another gang, but this thing, it's like cherry picking whatever the most awesome thing. So if you're playing a long-term game of like Frostgrave or something, I don't know what the equivalent would be. Like, you're allowed to, I guess Frostgrave has its sort of thing where if the wizard dies, then the scholar, the apprentice comes up into it. But it's like, well, whoever is the funnest and most noteworthy member of this warband or this gang or this little skirmish army, like, that's the thing that's worth saving, not this like endlessly XP accruing mega unit.
Yeah, but ideally it's like where you've got a game like, that Blood Bowl always had the freebooter sort of players, the star players that went from place to place. And what I ideally would like from a progression system is that a particular star player becomes a free agent. They always
right. They're so famous and cool now that like you can't afford them anymore. They go off and become independent.
Yeah, and now anybody can hire them, and that's sort of, because I remember the old star player book in Blood Bowl used to have like blank star player sheets at the back, and you just wrote them up for your own like guys to record them. And what should have happened is it should said, okay, When they get to a certain point that they become free agents, you can't afford them anymore, then write them into that star player sheet, and they are now a bona fide, just like all the other star players in this book. They are a rule. Anyone can have them at any point, just like all the other freebooters, because that guy is a guy with history, and that's what you want to preserve. So for me, that's what I'm always trying to do with progression systems, is to try and entrench those stories for people. And I think that's what drives people to want progression systems. It's that feeling of, me and you have been playing games week in and week out for X many years, and it's always a one-shot wonder and a one-off story, and I want that little bit more. I want to preserve it. I want to sort of, nail it down and stretch it out. And yeah, whether they make it, whether they achieve it, whether they're always fun or regularly not, I don't know. But the sense of an ending is important in all things, as in this video. Getting the ending point on a campaign or a progression system is important. Don't just let the guys get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until they tower across the battlefield like a colossus. That's not the right ending for them. It's not the right ending for you. Find a place where they're still could be considered indigent adventurers, and you understand why they're still coming to the battlefield and still going through these things. Frostgrave wizards that can raise entire cities shouldn't be freezing their asses off in some lost library. They should be in a university, being paid the big bucks to teach people. Find those stop points, figure out when the fun is going to stop, and force your players to stop at that point, because they will not do it for themselves. And who can blame them? You want to keep having fun while it's still fun.
And I do really like the idea that can finish on a human level, where it can finish with, one particular person is the coolest person in this thing. It's nice.
Find those stories, help your players to entrench those stories, but find it where they're still stories. There's a reason that the wandering hobo continues to wander and doesn't stick around and get married and settle down. As I say, endings are important in all things, as with this video. So I think that's the point where we're going to call this conversation to an end. If you have progression systems that you've enjoyed that you wish had pulled your toys out of your hands a little earlier, tell us about them. If you've got one that always managed to pitch it perfectly, always left you wanting just a little bit more and coming back for another run and trying another build, please tell us about those ones. Because
because I want to play it.
I want to play it, steal it, use it, whatever it happens to be. Drop into the Discord to have these conversations. Put your opinions down into the comment section. While you're in the comment section, hammer us a like and subscribe. Make the like and subscribe button bleed for mercy. Look us up wherever you can find us and get a hold of us. But for now, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye for this episode of Rule of Carnage. So thank you and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.